Hey, Chris, how's it going?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Good, good. He was calling someone a dummy. I hope it wasn't you.
Probably.
Where are you today?
I'm in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Wow.
All right,
What's the temperature?
balmy 70 degrees.
Oh my gosh. Hey, did you ever
Um,
meet that guy, William Penn? I was reading about him. He invented the pencil.
no, I haven't read William Penn, but I spent a lot of time in Philadelphia, which is where he was from. A lot of things named after him out there.
Ah, nice. What are you talking about today?
Well, today we're going to talk about how do we address and build and design a complex family's wealth structure. That's a fancy word for saying how do we get their finances in order when they got a lot of money.
Wow. Well, hey, how can I get a lot of money?
Start a business and build it over time.
Oh, okay. It has nothing to do with the lottery then, huh?
Or, well, here's what it's funny you asked that question. Right? And I had a friend of mine, and I was on a trip with him.
Oops, wait. We got to start the show.
Yep.
All right.
Oh,
All right, ready to start?
All right. Runaway show. Here we are. I have a sound issue there. Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome to CPA Academy. I am here with my friend, Chris Rowe, and we're going to have a very full hour. This is the CPA's Guide to Designing and Building a Family's Complex Wealth Structure. And let me tell you, having worked with Chris a few times now, I'm really looking forward to this. This guy knows his stuff. You're going to learn a lot today, but you're also going to receive a really nice checklist of things to talk about with your clients. Let me all mention that we're still smarting from the loss of Sid Cass, so I've got his picture there behind me. Just don't want to forget everything he did for the CPA profession and for the tax law profession. What an amazing guy he was. So just in memory of him, have a great day. You're going to get 1 hour of credit from cpaacademy.org, whether you deserve it or not. After the 1 hour, we're going to talk about Estate View software. You're not going to get any credit for that, and it's going to be shameless self-promotion. But you can use Estate View absolutely for free through December 31st as we continue to test it. If you are a Florida lawyer, then first of all, you have my sympathy, but secondly, you will also get an hour of credit from the Florida bar. Just send us an email and we'll make sure that you get that, again, whether you deserve it or not. If you have a question today, please click on the inverted upside down pyramid. Please then type backwards from right to left what your question is, and we will answer it if we know the answer. If we don't know the answer, we will pretend that we did not receive it. In about 4 to 6 hours, this video will be posted on YouTube, so you can watch it as many times as you want for free. Brandon Ketron and I, on October 31st, Halloween, will be talking about the new ERC crisis, which is caused by the IRS's announcement that they're not accepting ERC applications for now because there's been so much fraud. And we're going to talk about what to do if your clients got defrauded. It's really a very sad thing. Okay. So I'm going to go right now to the presentation and turn it over to you, Chris.
Well, good. So as we start, look, today we're going to talk about really three things. One is that how do we understand the client's, a wealthy family's current financial structure? Number two, what risks do they face? And number three, how do we build a roadmap in order to address the wealthy family's needs and their finances going forward? And then we'll dive into some risks that they face. But let's start with this. You know, I've had 25 years experience. I started as a CPA working in Ernst & Young in the entrepreneurial planning group, dealing with entrepreneurs. And I was a 25-year-old kid And I realized that, when you're dealing with planning for the client's business, you're really dealing with planning for them. It really has nothing to do with their business because it affects them and their family and everything else they have. And what I've learned over the years is when I was 25, I always thought that a wealthy family would have everything in order. They have a team of professionals, everything is in good order, really no value to be added by other professionals. And then what I realized is over the next 25 years is most of the time the families don't really care about their finances because they have a business and they're making a lot of money. And generally their finances end up like our healthcare system. They have a bunch of specialists who solve problems when they arise, but they don't really have anybody that says, hey, maybe we can prevent some problems here, right? Maybe we could think about it and I can coordinate all those specialists, right? Because look, your heart doctor is going to be treating cardiovascular disease, but he doesn't really care much if you have kidney disease or diabetes. I mean, he looks at your chart, but that's not his specialty. So, and eventually, as you move along, whether it be in your health or your wealth, as things get too far gone, i.e., you have too many problems competing with each other, as we know in the healthcare system, we die. That's what happens. When you eventually get too many problems, you check out, right? So the goal here, when you have a wealthy family, they rifle shoot, right? It's like their healthcare. They go get a bunch of specialists, they solve the problem of the day, but no one's really looking ahead, looking down that road going, wait, there's a fork in the road coming. Maybe we should address it now. And I heard this amazing quote from a psychologist or psychiatrist that I went to a seminar called Preparing Heirs. And it was about preparing the next generation for wealth. And one of the things that were said is we spend so much time, Alan does, I do, we talk about GRATs and CROTs and, name the acronym of the day, right? And we talk about all of that and we put that all in place and it's wonderful. And so we prepare the assets to go to the next generation. But most people fail to prepare the next generation to receive those assets, right? And we just expect them for some reason, hey, here's a bunch of trust, go figure it out. Well, that doesn't really happen. So this psychiatrist said this, that wealthy people and poor people have the same issues. Now, you think about that and you go, wait a second, maybe they don't have the same issues. But his point was, I spent 20 years counseling in clinics, dealing with the poor, the less wealthy people of society. And then I spent my last 20 years working with some of the most wealthy families on the face of the earth. And what I realized is they all have the same problems. The difference is that the poor people say, if I only have money, I could solve my problems. And the wealthy people know different because they have them and they can't solve their problems. So that's really, really the key. The key is to get out in front of this and have a coordinated plan. Just like your health, you need coordinated plan for your finances. So today, really what we're going to talk about is what's our purpose, right? What, as a wealth advisor, as a financial advisor, name whatever the industry wants to call you, as a counselor to wealthy families, what's our role? What role should we be playing? And number one, our purpose is really to get a complete picture of the family's wealth structure. And number two, it's really to identify the risks the families face and the opportunities that they could take advantage of in order to help them meet their priorities. That's it. That's the only goal, right? And in order to do that, one of the hardest jobs, I believe, and Alan can speak to this as he works with a lot of people, it's data, right? Understanding what's going on in a client's life. They don't even know. And they're the ones who control the data. So given they don't know, it's very difficult for us to get data, but it's important because we need to know everything about the family before we can make a diagnosis. If you went to your doctor and your doctor said, yeah, don't tell me anything about you, I'm going to give you a prescription, you would get up and walk out of the doctor's office and say, I'm not going to him. He's just going to give me some pills. And he didn't even ask me what's wrong, right? He didn't collect any health data. So our goal is really to collect data. And that means that we want participation, not only from us and from myself, but all the clients' advisors. They have attorneys and accountants and insurance brokers and all those people who understand the client. We need to work together as a team in order to get a complete picture. And then our job is to sort through all that data and organize it so that we can present both to the family and the team what a complete picture is. It helps us to better serve our family. Next slide, Alan.
Fantastic introduction, Chris. Thank you very much.
Here's what we're looking at, right? Effectively, right? We're trying to understand the family tree, who the players are on the field. When I call it a family tree, it's also the professionals, like who are all the players, right? Kids, grandkids, foundations, charity, everybody that are in their orbit or universe we want to know about, right? What's their current assets, liabilities, a simple net worth, right? Cash flow, where are they getting their money from? How are they living? What are they spending? Where's it coming from? How's it taxed? And then that leads into income and estate tax. Do they have an estate tax problem? What income bracket they're in? Then we want to understand their businesses. We want to understand what they've done from asset protection, their insurances, estate plan, philanthropy, children's finances, and investments. Now, on this particular slide, and I'll make this point, I purposely put investments last. And the reason I did is because most families and a lot of people I know, believe the most important thing on this list is investments. That's it. My investment guy. That's my investment guy. He makes me the most money. That's what he's supposed to do. Investments are a tool. It's a tool. It's a tool to address some of the risks we'll talk about later. It's a tool to meet a client's priorities. That's it. You will not get rich with investments. You will get rich with a business. You may get rich with investments over 50 years, but you are not going to buy the next AI hot tech stock and make yourself rich. You're not going to do it. Okay. Yes, your neighbor may, because she told you at a cocktail party you did, but generally that doesn't happen. Okay. There's always a few people who will buck the norm. Our job is not to address what we call the tails, right? The few people who are really successful or a few people who are just a calamity. Our job is to manage a person's wealth and to grow it over time. And investments are really meant to hedge inflation and to grow over time. That's what it is. If you want to get rich, go work on a business. Go be a corporate executive. Go be a professional. Go be a doctor and save your money, right? Your work, your life's work will make you rich. Your investments will grow over time and keep you rich, but that's really what it's for. And Stern, I use this quote, right? Stern, who started the Hartz Corporation and New York, Stern from the New York School of Business. I mean, his famous quote is, if you want to get wealthy, go start a business. I invest in the market to stay wealthy. And that's simple as that. Next slide, Alan.
By the way, Chris, just out of curiosity,
Sure.
We have clients that hit a real home run and they're in their late 40s and they just really do wonderful with the business. How often do they do wonderful with the second, third, and fourth businesses that they try?
That's an interesting question. I have a good story about that, right? So I would say let's first understand that sometimes, like music artists, we are just one-hit wonders, right? And we happen to know, sorry, I lost my train of thought, but we're one-hit wonders, and we're one-hit wonders because we happen to know the industry that we're in, right? Much like doctors, right? Just because you know how to do a bypass surgery doesn't necessarily mean you know how to write a trust agreement, Alan. So I think so to answer your question is, sometimes we have to realize we're just one-hit wonders. And by thinking that we're smarter than we really are and we try other things, it causes us only to lose money, okay? And just because I know how to build a tech company doesn't mean I'm really smart at investing, right? It doesn't mean I'm really smart at protecting my assets or buying insurance. And I think sometimes when you when you have the hubris that you're so smart that you can figure everything out, it causes you to make bad decisions because you can't. And you make a series of decisions. I use a good example. I had a client that was pitched a whole life, a physician pitched a whole life insurance policy, right? He calls me up. He wasn't even a client of mine. He was just a friend. And he asked me my opinion. So I went through it and I said, look, here's the pros and cons. And by the way, he actually gave me the pros and cons. He did his research before we talked. And for all the reasons that he said why he shouldn't buy it, he was spot on. And I showed him a couple other examples. If he's looking for insurance and he needs some coverage, here's some ways to do it that would actually put your family in a better situation. And then I didn't talk to him for 3 years. And now he's a client of mine. And lo and behold, he has the insurance policy. And lo and behold, three years later, he says to me, that was the dumbest thing I did. I said, well, I don't understand. You did your research. You had all the bullet points that said why you shouldn't do it. And you agreed with those bullet points and you still did it. Well, because I made the decision to do it even before those bullet points. So the point is, sometimes when we believe we're so smart, we outguess ourselves. So.
Yeah, the point I wanted to make is just a lot of clients, they sell their business for $50 million. They decide that they're so smart, and then they go invest 30 million in something and they just lose the 30. Or they get 100 million and then they hire such a smart family office manager and such a smart New York City investment guru and such a smart real estate investment guru, and they do all these fancy things and they end up with a 3% rate of return.
Right.
That's just my impression.
And you're absolutely right. Right. Sometimes you believe that or people believe they're smarter than they are. And when you look at the investment universe, right? If you look at the entire investment universe, right? Any real smart idea, any opportunities to make a lot of money in the investment world. And what I mean by that, I don't mean private equity. I mean the public markets, stocks, bonds, derivatives, whatever. Most of the free lunch would be arbitraged away by very smart people, right? And no offense, I won't say a name on here, I probably shouldn't, but there are some big Wall Street firms, right, who make a lot of money, but their clients don't. Why? Because that's their prop desk. Their proprietary trading desk is making the money. Their partners' capital accounts are making the money. They're not going to give that idea. If you knew the best trading ideas for the next 2 years, you sure aren't on a webinar telling everybody. You're just sitting at your house making your trades and making a lot of money, right? So that's the whole point of that. That's what I'll make, right? The prop desks make money, and that's it.
All right, I'm going to go to a polling question
Go
now.
ahead.
All right, everybody. Which of these books would you like to receive for free? A, 8 Steps to a Successful Estate Plan. B, The Florida Physician's Guide to Creditor Protection. C, Grow Your Medical Practice. And D, What Estate Planners and Others Need to Know About Bankruptcy. Hopefully you don't need D for yourself. Okay. How are we doing there, Joey? 80%. Once we get to 90%, we're done. Everybody's feeding their cats and washing their dishes and getting their stuff done. All right. All good. All right, where were we? Page 20 looks good. Inflation and bad decision making.
Could I go back one
Yeah.
slide, please?
Sure.
So let's talk about what we first need to do. And I think this is really important. When we deal with wealthy families do not have goals. They have priorities. Okay. When I was 25, my goal was to be able to retire, to save my money, to have a family and be able to pay for them and not end up broke when I'm 60. Okay. That was my goal, right? Start a business. So now fast forward and, as you become wealthier, you don't have a goal. Like a person who's worth 100 million doesn't have a goal to retire, right? He doesn't have a goal to start his business, right? They have priorities. And really, when we focus on their priorities, what are their priorities? Their priorities are around themselves, their children and grandchildren, their businesses, and their community. That's the 4 things people focus on. And those change over time. They might want to support their community now. They might care less later. They might like their children, and then they have grandchildren, and they go, I don't like my children because my grandchildren are much nicer to me, right? And, I can spoil them because I don't have to raise them, right? Send them home. They could drive their parents nuts. So those points is their priorities change over time. They don't have goals anymore. They have priorities. So what's our job? Our real job is to work with the family to understand their priorities at the current time in those 4 situations. And then those priorities provide us a framework for making decisions. So, we just talked about this. If your priority is to live the rest of your life and have enough money, and then provide X amount of money to my kids, and provide Y amount of money to certain charities, and let's assume you could do all that. And they go, hey man, I think I'm gonna put like $50 million. I'm worth 100. I think I'm gonna put 50 million in this next hot business. Your answer is why? That wasn't one of your priorities. Well, I think I can make even more. Why? What are you gonna do with the more money? I don't know. I think I could just make more. Do you want your kids to get more? No. Do you want charity to get more? No. But I think I can get a bigger plane if I hit this. Really? Why? Because yours don't go where it needs to? So you can use the priorities to screen out craziness, right? And you just simply ask him, how does that fit in with your priorities? And now again, I'm not saying that works all the time, right? We still have people who do what they do. It's their money and they can feel free. But it's really the key is understanding priorities. Number 2, we need to evaluate all the risks the family faces. Most important, evaluate the risk, whether it be legal, insurance, whatever, and get rid of it. To the extent that we can mitigate or get rid of it, get rid of it. Okay? In other words, if there's a risk of estate tax, you could buy insurance to mitigate that, right? You could diversify one's investments. We don't get paid, wealthy families don't get paid to take on risk that can be mitigated for pennies on a dollar. You just don't do it, right? And then once you mitigate the risk, it allows the wealthy family's assets the ability to compound over time without big losses. For instance, I'll give you a simple example. Client's worth $100 million, hypothetically, right? Buys a $3 million house. Why does that client need to buy homeowners insurance? What? The house burns down, he can't afford to write a $3 million check? No, but for $10,000 a year, you'd be nuts, right? I can insure this potential risk of losing $3 million for $10,000 a year. And oh, by the way, what happens if the house burned down in a year when the market's down 50%? So his account's not 100 million, it's 50 million, and now he got to pull another 3 million or 5 million to build his house. It has an effect. So again, wealthy families don't get paid to take on risk that they can offshoot for pennies on the dollar. And again, once we do that, it's about building an educational structure between the team that we assemble. I have a client, work with Alan, right? He's part of the team. When I have legal questions, I'm going to bounce it off to him. We want to make sure that every team member, the CPA, the attorney, the insurance brokers, property and casualty people, everybody who's an advisor to the family, we want to make sure they're in a room and they understand what's going on pretty much every decision the family's making. Why? That's coordinated care. If our healthcare system worked that way, we'd probably live a little longer, but that's not the way it works. So wealthy families should have a coordinated care. And that's really why a lot of wealthy families move towards a family office. What they're really saying in building the family office, let's take the vanity out of it, right? It's a cool thing to have a family office. But what wealthy families are really saying is, I want a group of people who are solely focused on me. That's what they're really saying, so that I can get coordinated care. And so that's really what we want to do. And again, we always go back to making decisions around the family's priorities, right? When we're faced with something, how does this further the family's priorities? Next slide.
Chris, let me ask you something, because I think everybody has this issue. How do you tactfully address the situation where there's a very weak link in the team? You know, the brother-in-law is the CPA and has no idea what he or she is doing. Or the insurance agent is very, very aggressive and in their pocket. So how do you, or, time and time again, I explain to clients, yeah, you probably need 5 different kinds of lawyers to help us by the time we're done here.
Right.
4 of them being outside of my office. How do you do that?
Well, it's difficult, right? And it's difficult to do because, as you said, right? Like, you're sitting down with a gentleman and you're talking about his investment advisors, and you say, who is this and why are they doing this? And he goes, wow, that's, my wife and his wife are college roommates and they've been friends for 40 years. And if I fire him, my wife's going to kill me, right? Like, and so sometimes we just keep them as part of the team and we deal with the issue. Others, if they have no loyalty, we just have to be honest, right? And it's okay to say, I understand you have your college roommate or your high school friend that you grew up with who's your personal attorney, but he's a real estate attorney. Why is he drafting your estate planning document? Right? Well, he knows how to do that too. He does, personal injury, real estate, and estate planning. But you're worth like $60 million. So we tactically keep them as part of the team, right? We say, look, let's use them for what they do. If he's an excellent real estate attorney, when you're doing real estate, use him. But don't use him for your corporate structure or your thing. Hey, if your brother-in-law is managing some of your money and you want to go to Thanksgiving and not be like, why'd you fire me? Just because you got rich. You don't want to hear that. That's fine. Give him some money. We'll let him do what he does and we'll work the whole portfolio around it. If he wants to buy a bunch of large stocks, fine. We'll just slot him in a little slot and we'll get back. Everybody's great, right? But to the extent, that's a very good question, but to the extent this is their sole provider, unfortunately, you have to have the tough decision. And again, let the client make the decision that they want, right? If they go, no, I'm keeping them. Okay, the downside. You've been told.
Yeah, you could say, that real estate lawyer can oversee your estate planning. Have the real estate lawyer bring in the A-rated, board certified LLM and tax of his choice. Let him be in charge of it. Let him bring in a law firm from, the other side of the world that won't steal the client away. But you need to get this done right. I think, at a certain point, you have a duty of honesty to your client to say, hey, you're flapping in the wind here if you don't get this thing fixed. So let me go to the next polling question. This is the second polling question. You only have to answer 3 out of 4. What are you? Are you a practicing CPA, a practicing lawyer, a financial advisor, a business owner, or E, most of us, a confused individual? I like that Tom Peters quote. If you're not confused, you're not paying attention. Joey, how are we doing? 88%. Okay. Fantastic. A killer good crowd. Are we at slide 20 now? Good. All right. Chris, are we at slide 20 now?
Yes, that's perfect slide. So when we look at the slide, right, and we want to say, okay, what risks do wealthy families face? On the left-hand side of your screen is inflation, spending, income taxes, family division, variance drain, and investment costs. We'll deal with those more specifically. On the other side, the risks families face, what I call more soft issues, bad decision-making, second marriages and children and spouses, in-laws who become outlaws, lawsuits, cybercrimes, reputational risk. Let me give you a quick story. A lot of these risks, when you look at a business owner, right? And the business owner, I refer to the business as the goose. And the goose lays that golden egg every year, i.e. the money that the business owner makes, right? That net profit. And that profit the business owner makes, although it may go up and down over time, but mostly it goes up because the business grows, right? It sort of mitigates all these risks, right? Oh, I get sued for $100,000, fine. I can just write a check. I made $3 million this year. You know what? I owe my ex-spouse, 200,000 a year. Oh, well, I can write him a check. I make 3 million, right? I make $1 million investment, in my buddy's car wash and it doesn't work. Oh, well, I make 3 million next year. So that goose just keeps laying golden eggs. But what happens when you sell the business? You've given away the goose. It lays you one last big golden egg. And you don't want that egg to be Humpty Dumpty, because once it falls off the wall and it cracks, you're screwed. So now all of a sudden, when all you have is investments to generate you money, all of these risks become very important to mitigate, right? And so the second story is, and this happens, please, as a wealthy family, tell your kids not to drive a car through a building while they're under the influence and have cocaine in them. Not a good move, right? That's a bunch of bad decision making and reputational risk. So now you have to build a new building, right? So like those are just bad decisions, right? Of why people with a lot of money do certain things that they do. It's really because of the team around them aren't doing proper counseling, right? Part of it's parenting, right? We all realize that. But the other part is really to counsel people to make better decisions, right? Sometimes people just take on risk that just will have no real rewards to them, right? And you have to make decisions on a risk reward basis, but sometimes people will just take on outsized risks that they can't comprehend for what effectively is probably a little reward. And no one gets paid for that. You don't get paid for that in investing. You don't get paid for that in life. Okay. Now some people would argue, why start a business? That's a lot of risk. What is? But the reward is huge, right? And most entrepreneurs, they're risk takers, but they're calculated risk takers, right? When you start a law firm, it's not like you were a revolutionary and be like, hey, I'm starting this law firm, never been done before, don't even know what the law is. You kind of, people who take risks like myself, we see models, we look at businesses and we go, we could do that better. But look, it's been done before. We just need to make it better and we could do well at it. So we're taking calculated risk, but we're not crazy. Elon Musk, he takes risks. Okay, probably, and he's gotten a lot of reward for it. So next slide.
I want to mention 3 big mistakes in case we don't get them that we could help clients with. One is jumping into bubbles. There's a great book by Judge Posner called A Failure of Capitalism. And it was about the 2007 recession and how everybody and their brother and their sister bought a house and was convinced that the economy could never fail.
In your fine state, may I add, Alan?
Yeah. Goes back to the tulip bankruptcy of 1610, I believe, in Holland.
Right.
People see prices go up and then they think that they'll always go up. You have 3 years in a row of the market going up 14%, and your clients all think that for the rest of creation, it's going to go up 14%. So that's one big one that we see. A second one that we see is a gambleholism. We see it in Tampa, Florida, because there's a casino in Tampa, Florida called Hard Rock Casino. We see a lot of illness. It's a mental illness, but we see it among entrepreneurs as well. They want to gamble. They get dopamine hits from getting into deals.
Mm-hmm.
They need to realize that that's what it is. And I've had that conversation. I've said, I think we're just going for the dopamine here. The third thing is dishonesty. Madoff, he made 11% a year on average for his clients for many years. He couldn't have been dishonesty. Well, they will see dishonesty. And that's part of the bad decision making, is investing in something that you're not tracking. There's no big CPA firm auditing that entity. So It becomes a license to steal. Do you have anything, topics? I just wanted to make sure I cover them because I see wealthy people do that. Every year I see them by the handful.
And Alan, that's just some simple checks and balances in your system, right? Where, Madoff, he was an investment advisor, but he custodied the client assets. Right? Like, okay, if you're just trading what you consider stocks, bonds, and options, why do you have to custody it in-house? Why can't I have it at Northern Trust or Fidelity or Schwab or Pershing, like the big boys? Why can't I get an independent statement so I can see what was traded? Well, it's very simple, because he wasn't trading anything. He was making them up, and he had to give his own statements, and there was no, so, look, we all could be subject to bad decisions and what are called cyber crimes or those frauds. But the thing is, and I'll get to this when it comes to our spending slide, but most people, the problem is not an investment return problem. It's a spending problem. And they want to spend more, so they want to make more to spend more, because they still want to give the same amount of assets to their kids. And when you can prey on people who have that mentality, it sets up for the Madoff. Ooh, my investment guy says he can only make 7 or 8%. Well, Madoff makes 11, and he does it every month. And look how much I can spend, until you can't. That's the risk. If you want to hit into the next slide, I'll run through these, the next few slides very quickly, but I think this really sets the stage. What's one of the risks we face over a long period of time? Inflation. If you look at this, this is since 1872. Inflation has been 7.75 on average. Of course, the last 10 years, as you can see on the slide, it's been 2.4. So inflation lately has spiked up to 8% or whatever. And we, as we sit here, go, this is crazy. Look how much more Coca-Cola costs in the store, right? But we're at about our historical averages. Okay, so understand that inflation is it's sort of like the heart attack, right? It's the silent killer of wealth. Look at the three gentlemen at the bottom of the screen, right? On the left is Cornelius Vanderbilt, Andrew Carnegie. We say Carnegie in Pittsburgh. In New York, I think it's Carnegie. But I'm 2 minutes from Carnegie, PA. So we like Andrew here. And then you have John Rockefeller. The richest people in 1872. How many of their families are still rich? How many family members do they have that are on the Forbes 400 richest? Maybe some of the Rockefellers may still be there. I haven't looked lately. But the only wealthy Vanderbilt I knew of was Gloria Vanderbilt. And of course, she started her own design firm and made a lot of money herself. Of course, her son, Anderson Cooper, who inherited her money. But Carnegie gave most of his money to the library, and Rockefeller gave a lot of his money away. But his sons and first generation descendants still have money. So inflation eats away money over time, along with spending. Next slide, Alan.
When you are doing an illustration for a client, maybe a 40-year-old, to what they're going to need to retire, what inflation rate do you guess for the next 30 to 40 years?
Well, I mean, if you were looking at history, you would say I'm going to use 7.75, right? And then of course it doesn't look well, and they all tell you you're crazy because the guy down the street used 1, right? But I look at 3 to 4. But here's an interesting question that you asked but didn't ask. And the question is, for an average person, inflation may be 3 to 4%. But for wealthy people, inflation could be much higher. Why? The cost of goods and services they're buying have a tendency to inflate quicker. In other words, if I'm buying Rolex watches all the time, my inflation cost on a Rolex may not be 3 or 4%. Sure, it's 3 or 4% on my lunch meat, right? But it's not 3 and 4% on the Rolexes. Sometimes they're 10 and 15%, right? How about my Bentleys and my Mercedes and my houses and so sometimes your question is, you may illustrate it depending on lifestyle, but you could illustrate it higher depending on a wealthy family because their experiences are more.
Wow, that's a great point. Okay. Wow.
next particular question is really, what's the effect of inflation in 1872, right? If you put $100 away in 1872, and 151 years later, we all wake up, great, great, great grandpa put it away, we're worth 56 million bucks. But take a look at where all the investment returns have happened since 1985. Look at the rocket ship that basically took off. Right around, call it around 85, we started to see the 80s, 90s, 2000s, 2010s, when we've lived in the bull market, relatively low inflation and a bull market, okay? However, if you look at this and say, wow, I'm worth 56 million and I'm rich. If you go back to 1872 and you take out inflation, you're really worth about 1.38 million. So effectively, you're living today on 56 million, but it's as if you had 1.38 million in 1872. Still very rich in 1872, but you weren't Andrew Carnegie rich. You weren't John Rockefeller rich, right? Now, what this chart never accounts for is taxes. And the one thing that happened in 1872 is there were no taxes, right? They repealed the tax in 1872. If you want to go next slide. Without going into taxes real quick, if you look at these slides, and I make a comment on this, if you could see, here's been investment returns since 1926, okay? The gray line or the gray lines at $17 there on the right-hand side represents inflation. That's just the general growth of $1 on inflation. The $22 represents T-bills, i.e., hey, man, I'm playing it safe, okay? Number 3 is government bonds. Okay, I don't want to be as safe as setting in T-bills, but I don't want to risk anything. And then, of course, the top are the roller coasters, right? Small cap and large cap stocks, right? And you can see small cap stocks have outperformed large caps over a long period of time, but it's a much greater roller coaster. So what do you take from this chart? I take it, look, I played football, so I kind of like to use football analogies. And my analogy is the only thing that a prevent defense does is prevent you from winning most of the time. Okay, right? So if you want to play it safe, you might think you're winning, but you're really not, right? What these charts don't factor in is taxes. So you take that $22 of T-bills and you start taxing them, even at the lowest bracket, you realize that over time, okay, you're barely pacing inflation. And that, 40 years from now, you may still have all the money you started 40 years earlier, but you're not wealthier. You'll buy less pork chops than you did 40 years ago when you were feeding your family. So that's really the point. The point is, when we design an investment portfolio, you have to understand the client's priorities in the short term, but you have to realize you got to fight taxes and inflation. And those are big numbers over time. Whether you use 3% or 8%, they're a big number. Next slide, Alan.
You know what? I'm going to go ahead and do another polling
Sure.
question here. And we're getting great feedback. And so here's a good polling question. Would you like to see a part 2 of this presentation? A, yes, B, no, or C, I would rather jump off the Brooklyn Bridge. And I think the answer is going to be yes. What's it looking like, Joey?
90% yes, 90% voted.
Wow, 90% yes and 90% voted. That's very good. Excellent.
I was going to say, if my wife's watching it, she might say Brooklyn Bridge.
That was the one who said no. Right. Exactly.
She said no. I have to listen to this every
Chris,
day.
I have to admit, she tried to vote 5 times too, so we had to pick her off. Okay. So
let's go. Excuse me. Let's go back a few slides, Alan, to spending.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Forgot about that. Okay, here we go.
Okay, go. You're right there. Okay, so let's talk about investments. Let's talk about family, right? In my experience, more wealth is lost to overspending, bad behavior, and divorce than the market losses overpaying your advisors or bad investment or high investment costs, right? Or not earning. Families usually say, and I made this before, hey, look, we need to make a higher return. Well, why? Well, because I'm spending too much. So can we control returns or can we control spending? I think we can control spending. My point is, please, when you're advising a wealthy family or you are a wealthy family, yeah, don't make your decisions in spending like the US government, right? Just don't do it, right? Like, don't just spend money and go, oh, we could tax. We could just get more money in, we could tax, right? You can't tax and you can't control investment returns. And sometimes investment returns are lower for a longer period of time than you will ever think of. Okay, so really, it's about overspending. Let me give you a great story. I had a person who sold his business for a lot of money, right? I mean, really life-changing money. Okay, built the business from scratch, worked 70 hours a week, sold it, right? Wife, 2 children. We got his money. I told him what he could do. He calls me up. I want to buy a nicer house. Yeah, no big deal. Sell your old house. You're worth X millions of dollars. It's only going to cost you about 500 grand to buy this new house after you sell your old house. No big deal. Done. I want to buy a Jaguar. Okay, done. Right? Still, no big deal. I want to improve my house. Okay, well, here, spend this much. Okay. So fast forward, he spends 4 times what he should have on improving the house, number one. Number two, in late 2007, he comes to me and says, I think I want to get a divorce. I'm like, whoa, did you tell your wife that? And he goes, no. I go, good. You should understand what that really means before you go run your mouth. Right? He's still a friend of mine. He's one of the oldest people. So we went through that. So like fast forward, what's the story about? He walks away with 40% of his net worth. I mean, you only lost 50 in 2008 and 9. That was the worst drawdown in our history. But divorce has a bigger drawdown than sometimes equities. So people are afraid to lose money in equities. Oh, by the way, you've gotten back from 2008, but he's never has. Divorce hurts. Spending in divorce really hits wealth, right? So when you talk about your children, it's really important when I talk to the next generations, prenups and post-ups, right? I mean, divorce could, and look, we don't know when any of us are going to get divorced, right? We hope it never happens, but the reality of it is it happens. So you need to protect yourself because a lot of wealth is lost. On top of the fact that while you're going through it, if you're running a business, it's probably taking your focus away. And what effect does a divorce have on the future value of your business? Well, the answer is we don't know, but I'm sure it's going to have an effect. And you won't know until many years later when you look back and go, wow, I spent 5 years in divorce and custody battles and whatever. I couldn't grow my business. It's a real effect. Next slide, Alan. So really the next slide is we have to understand that when we deal with wealthy families, they have to pay income tax, period. They don't operate as foundations. They don't operate as nonprofits. They are taxable entities. Number one, and number two, the federal government thanks you and gives you a parting gift on the way out of this world by taxing you at 40% of everything you work for. That's why you hire guys like Alan and myself, because we try to not give the government your 40%. That's simple as that. But you have a nice parting gift on the way out between the funeral director and the federal government and the state government. They say thank you for your 85 or 90 years on earth. That's kind of the way it works. So next slide, Alan.
Chris, what about when the client comes in and says, oh, I met this new tax engineer and he or she has these really good theories. I'm going to buy solar panels in California. I'm going to do environmental easements that'll cost me $100,000 and get me $1 million write-off. What do you say? What do you do? What do you see in the real world here?
Well, I think that's a very interesting question, right? And it goes back to the risk reward. Well, my friends did it. Well, remember what you said, Alan, a while back, and you said about people jumping into bubbles, right? some of these tax strategies are like jumping into bubbles. If you did them early on, like if you were the guy who invented it and you did it, the IRS just may not notice you. That doesn't mean the risk changes. It's just the IRS doesn't notice you, right? You just happen to be the lucky guy who skated by. But eventually, when these strategies hit the internet and become mass marketed, they become a bubble. And usually the people who jump in once they, hey, I read this on YouTube, or I saw this on YouTube, or I read it on Google, they get hit with the bubble. So, my answer is, and I had this quick conversation last year. I go, look, it's just not worth the effort. Pay your tax, move on. If you want to minimize taxes, use sound tax minimization strategies. Fine. You want to put solar panels on your house because it helps you out and you save some tax dollars, feel free. But if you're putting solar panels on your house solely because someone told you that you could write it all off, then that's fine. I mean, I had a particular person that was told, well, we'll put solar panels on in the new roof, and as part of it, you could write everything off of solar panels. I go, so I read the contract and I told the client, I'm like, well, your advisor, the guy selling you solar panels told you this. But I can tell you this, if the IRS pulls that contract, it's pretty clear how much is for a roof and how much is for solar panels. And it's really clear that that roof has nothing to do with the structure of solar panels. So I think you'll lose. I said, just move on. Just do solar panels if you want. This is going to be your savings. So, but again, every client likes the bubbles and mystical returns. Sometimes it's just not worth right? The juice is not worth the squeeze. As we move on,
I'm going to do the last polling question because some of the attendees can leave after 50 minutes. So, final polling question is, would you like to be a beta tester of the Estate View software? If you do, we'll just send you the password, which is test, T-E-S-T, and your username is test, T-E-S-T, at test.com. But if you answer yes here, we'll send you an email and our draft instruction manual. Estate View will be free for beta testers at least through December 31st. So, Joey, do we have any answers here? Okay, 85% voted. Chris's wife bought 4 of them, so that's perfect. All right, so here is a family tree. There we go with a family tree.
So when we look at a family tree, let's say that patriarch and matriarch, right? Mom and dad have 20 million and they're living their life just fine. Well, we're not going to talk, but let's not talk about estate tax and all that fancy stuff. Let's assume we live in a world where there's no estate tax. There's no taxes on the way out. Mom and dad pass away, each kid gets 10 million. I don't know about you, but they can live half as good as mom and dad. Mom and dad had 20 to live on, each kid has 10, right? Now child 1 passes away and each one of the grandchildren get 5. Well, they have 25% of the wealth. The grandchild 1 has 25% of the wealth is grandpa and grandma. How can he live like that? He can't. So taxation and division are really big dissipators of wealth. That's why the Vanderbilts and the Carnegies and the Rockefellers aren't as rich anymore. As that money moves through generations, even if it's subject to estate tax, it's just that the grandchildren, great-grandchildren can't live like the wealth earner. The more and more remote you get from the main wealth earner, wealth dissipates. So when people say, oh, the rich get richer, that's true. Usually the business owner, if he's rich and the business is working, he gets richer. But as that money starts to move through the family, they don't get richer, they get poorer from spending, from inflation, from taxes, and from the number of people that exist in the family tree who live on the wealth. So next slide. So we talk about really 2 things that families face as we switch to investments. And those 2 things are investment returns and drawdown risk, i.e. how volatile is your investment returns? There's what we call a volatility tax. No one really thinks about it, but there's technically a volatility tax. And number two, when you're living on your portfolio and you don't have that goose anymore, the business, large drawdowns and you pulling money out of those portfolios hurt. They dissipate wealth quicker. Next slide, Alan. So when you look at these, you can see how on the bottom slide, right, where you have these big dips, those are drawdown risk. And you can see sort of from 2022 now, we're in a massive sort of drawdown. But if you look at these portfolios, and I basically kept these things simple, right? There's no games being played in me designing the portfolios. Portfolio 1 was 60% stocks, 40% bonds. Portfolio 2 is 60% stocks, 20 bonds, 20 gold, 20 commodities. And then number 3, we add a little bit of what I call an uncorrelated diversifying strategy. And then I guarded it against the old, everybody says, don't pay any investment costs, right? Keep it cheap. So let's throw the Vanguard Balance Fund in there, right? Now, I did put a 1% advisory fee on each of these. Just, let's, that's the industry average, and everybody complains about 1%, but let's just throw it on, see what happens. So take a look at where the Vanguard Balanced is versus any of the others. And then most importantly, look at the drawdown risk, right? And the drawdown risk is what a portfolio does from its high to low, and that's in the last column on your right. If you notice, a much more diversified strategy under portfolio 3 actually has a higher rate of return and less of a drawdown risk. It has a less of a worse year. It has the best year, okay? And it has less standard deviation. So as you move down and you diversify, what I'm really showing you on this screen is nothing more than what they mean by diversification is the only free lunch, right? To some extent, you're picking up a tad bit performance, you're minimizing your downside risk because you have a free lunch. And again, that is compared against the Vanguard Balance Fund, which is, hey, I can just do this myself kind of thing. So when we're designing portfolios, we're looking at really drawdowns, right? When wealthy families are living on the portfolios, we're concerned with, when the markets get bad, how much do we lose? Because when you lose money and you pull money out, it magnifies that, right? So those are the two things you need to understand. Flip one forward, Alan. This chart is about cost, okay? And I threw this on here because everybody makes this comparison. Look, this is how much money I lose if I pay somebody to do my work. Right? If I make a 4% return and I pay a higher fee, I lose money. Well, of course, right? If the return's the same and I pay more, I'm going to have less. But the reality of it is, when you're looking to manage your investments, I always say, when you hire advisors, what value are they bringing? What value are they bringing? If I'm just paying a cost for no value, well, then yes, I'm losing money. But if you flip one more forward. So when we evaluate a wealthy client's portfolio, number one, we want to understand what their all-in investment costs are, right? Not only for their advisors, but for the underlying investments that they own. The real big question is, are they paying too much for beta? What's beta? Beta is, I buy the Vanguard total stock market. Market goes up, I'm going up. Market goes down, I'm going down. That's beta, right? I'm not trying to pick anything. I just own the 5,000 of the world's largest stocks, and it moves with the market. That's beta. Well, if you could get beta for 2 basis points, why would you pay 15? It makes no sense, right? So now, if you're paying too much for beta, that's usually where the costs are, right? It's not the advisors, not anywhere else. This is really people pay too much for beta. Number 2, people pay too much for access. Access. I get access. Bernie Madoff, boy. I'm playing golf with him. He's going to give me access, right? And I pay too much for inappropriate. Most people will go back when they look at wealthy families and say, wait, but look at Yale's endowment. Yale's endowment had such a great return. And look what they do. Well, they don't pay too much for access. Okay, I can tell you that. Number one. Number 2, anybody who's really good at managing money, who needs $1 billion, calls Yale, and Yale says, I'll give you $1 billion at this price. if anyone who is really, really, really good at managing money wants your 200 or 500 or $1 million check, yeah, you should run, because the really good ones don't really care about your $500,000 check, right? They don't want that. So what happens is we get access to these private investments and our returns get muted. In other words, we pay too much for our return experience because we're getting the averages. We're not getting the best, right? And lastly, when we look at it, you have to factor in taxes. So where do you own this stuff, right? As a Yale endowment, they can own all this stuff in their portfolio. As an individual, we can't own high taxed investments if I live in, say, the state of New Jersey and I'm in the 40% federal bracket, right? I need to own them somewhere else. So I have to take a cost benefit approach and look at taxes. So sometimes I may want to own some alternative investments, but maybe the tax cost, when I look at an after tax return, I might just be better off playing the long game and owning some diversified stocks. You just have to evaluate that.
So Chris,
Alan, go ahead.
Yeah, you've got one. First of all, we don't have hardly any questions. We got a lot of compliments. You've done a beautiful job. One thing I would like to do with you next week, I would like to have you go over with me, and we'll we'll video this and we'll send it to all the attendees. These slides here, beginning at slide 30, slide 30, 31, and the slide and slide 32. I'd like you to spend 15 minutes on it to give me better background and to explain how you would explain this to a family. So, and I think probably our attendees agree. And then we definitely need to schedule part 2 and part 3. And that a few people said, yeah, part 2 and part 3. This was a great presentation. Do you have any final words before we start playing with the state view?
Sure. Could you go to the spider web, since it's
it's almost Halloween.
Since it's almost Halloween, we'll end with spider web, right?
Right.
And so if you look at the spider web, and I'll end with a real quick story, right? These are all the areas we look at for wealthy families, of course, the families in the middle. But the one interesting thing about the spider web is that spider webs are interconnected, right? There's this bunch of interconnected webs, right? And you could draw any path and go from one. So let's look at asset protection. I'll end with this. And this is really the culmination of why you have a team, why you look at a client's priorities, and why you have to have a coordinated effort. Let's assume that client tells me, I'm really concerned with lawsuits. Really concerned with lawsuits. I have these assets. I'm really concerned. My business is highly litigious and I may get sued. So I say, well, great. Let me call Alan, who's your attorney, and we'll talk about asset protection, right? So Alan comes back and says, hey, that's wonderful. Why don't we just set up a Nevada asset protection trust, blah, blah, blah. We'll put the client's assets. Great. But the problem or the benefit of the asset protection trust is if the client raids it every day, he's not really doing anything. So he got to kind of put his assets out there and basically say, these are some segregated assets. But what if the client needs cash flow, right? What if he needs cash flow from that? So like he's spending every dime he makes, but yet we're going to wall off assets and say you can't get to them, right? Now, that particular, maybe if we set up assets in Nevada, he may save some income taxes, right? And if we put it for his kids, that allows him to be added in way in the future. If he needs to, we're doing some estate planning. So my whole point of that is, when it comes from one issue, can I protect my assets from litigation? It starts to hit every other issue: cash flow, taxes, estate planning. How do we invest the money out there, right? It's not just, oh, let's set up a trust, right? So that's why I use the spider web, because whenever you're making decisions in any one of these areas, 9 chances out of 10, it's reverberating into other areas that you need to consider. And I end with that as why you need to have a coordinated effort amongst a team of highly qualified professionals like Alan, the CPAs, the insurance brokers, is because you need that team to be able to hit those multitude of areas that exist when you're making decisions for clients. So
Thank you.
thank you very much, Alan.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Really good. So we released a Thursday report yesterday. Oh, by the way, I sprained my wrist. That's what that is. So we released a Thursday report yesterday. If you didn't get the Thursday report, just email me. It's you can email info@gassmanpa.com. We'll get it out to you. But pretty good article on the Corporate Transparency Act by Marty Shinkman that came out on Lineberg. This is really going to happen January 1st. You're going to be asked, can you imagine every single client getting you a copy of the driver's license? That's not going to be easy. The Corporate Transparency Act is going to be a very big pain. And then, of course, the new ERC situation. We're going to be on Lineberg. That's not free, but we're also going to be October 31st, a free 30-minute on that. So just wanted to mention it. So now I'm going to Estate View. And Chris, you're welcome to stay or go, whatever you decide. Have you played with Estate View at all?
I have. I think it's wonderful. I've been I think I told you I was using some illustrations for a CLAT last week for a potential client situation. So I play with it a lot. It's fun.
Okay, good. Thanks. Oh, by the way, there's no credit for this. You've gotten an hour credit, but there's no reason to stick around unless you want to stick around. Estate View keeps changing. It's going to continue to keep changing. I think a lot of you have already seen it, but I want to show you the main modules in case you haven't seen it and what's changed recently in case you have. So under the category of comprehensive plans, I go to married clients, and the format is on the left is your input of information, and on the right are your scenarios that it will show you, and in the middle is the illustration. So for example, in this situation, I've got Jane and Terry, and their house is worth, well, let me go ahead and just start a new one. I'll go click here, new. There is Bob and Mary Sample, $3 million house, 30 million of investments, a little bit of life insurance, no planning, a little bit of tax, then no planning but 20 years growth, 20 million of tax, credit shelter trust on the first death, brings the tax down a little bit. Cupert trust will bring the tax down a little bit more. Annual gifting brings it down more. Life insurance planning brings it down more. An installment sale brings it down more. And then leaving some to charity brings it down more, or a CLAT. Now, what's new here, and by the way, there's another view, the timeline view, which shows you what happens if the second client, if the surviving spouse dies each year. The red is the dissipation to estate tax if you do no planning. And if you do an installment sale, the yellow is the installment sale trust, and you see the red is lower. And then when you go and leave the rest to charity, you see charity has to get a lot. Your children get less when you leave it to charity, but Uncle Sam gets nothing, and your children can run the charity. Now, one of the things that and by the way, I hit fit all, and that fits there. One of the things we've done is on the right-hand side, when I click the box, now I just have each scenario shown by a name and a button. So I don't have to show it this way, which could be disorienting here on the left. The other nice button that Kevin added, and by the way, Kevin Gray is our brilliant programmer. When I click here on the left, now the input is much bigger and easier. So my secretary can go ahead and do the input, and then I can, and then it can come back to click there, and it goes back to where it was. For those of you who haven't seen it, when you click Generate Client Letter, you can select which scenarios you'd like the client to see, and then and which illustrations, you click generate client letter. It takes about a minute and a half, and it prepares a letter in Word that explains the plan. The other thing that Kevin has added is and we're still refining this, so it's not where it's going to be, but it's working. How much does life insurance cost for this couple if they just want term or a GUL policy? Well, you've got their age here, and per million, this tells you what a standard policy might cost, what a preferred policy might cost, 20-year, 25-year, 30-year, and universal. And if I want 2 million or 1.5 million, it just all doubles. So at least it gives me, it gives the estate planner at least something to talk to the client about, so you have a guess as to what it might cost. The other thing that we have added here is a ability to have an exploding asset. So believe it or not, a lot of clients do come to us and say, well, my company is worth 20 million, but I think in 5 years it's going to be worth 50 million. If I get this patent, or if I get this joint venture, or if this business broker really does what they say they can do. So when that happens, you can now click on exploding asset, and then the exploding asset inputs, and I can open this up. So the exploding assets input are, what's the exploding asset worth today? When would it sell? 5 years from now, 3 years from now? What will it be worth when it explodes? And what's the income tax going to be on that explosion? And then most importantly, am I going to make an installment sale of part ownership of this? In which case I click here. And then it asks me what percentage of this am I going to put in the installment sale? Got to leave some out if the client wants to be able to pay their taxes, and this is a grantor trust. So then when I go down to the installment sale here, it's already in there. It's running parallel. So now I can go back, and now when I click on installment sale, it's going to tell me in orange what happened to my exploding asset at each stage of the game. So that took 3 or 4 days of programming, but it works really well. We used it actually yesterday. Brandon used it for a client to say, well, here's what happens if you sell 30%. Here's what happens if you sell 50%. Here's what happens if you sell 70%. Here's what happens if it sells in 5 years for 70 million. Here's what happens if it sells in 5 years for 100 million, assuming your income tax rate. And the client was able to make a decision. Before, that would have taken us a day to do. Joey or Chris, anything I should mention on this? Joey, do you want to show your camera?
Sure.
Joey Kleiner is with us here, and he's been doing a lot of work on this. So Joey,
I have a question, Alan. Sorry. When
Sure.
you were just showing the installment sale for an exploding asset, and you showed that, I assume that it was an installment sale to a grantor trust, right?
Always.
But what can you, or how would you look at it if you were deciding to sell an installment sale to a non-grantor trust because the client wasn't going to sell this business for 3 or 4 years, right? There's a 2-year rule. It used to be you could do it the day before, but there's a 2-year rule now. But like, what happens if it's hey, I'm not going to sell this for 4 or 5 years? Just a consideration. I know that's not really, from an estate planning standpoint, we don't care. It still gets out of the estate either way. But the question is, what's the effect if we delay that income tax over 20 years for a client?
You're right.
Interesting.
We will sometime next year have the rushing the two, because as you're saying, you could have a taxable trust, sell it to the taxable trust, and then more than 2 years after that, the taxable trust sells it,
Right.
and the tax is deferred. and reduced significantly. So that's a very good point. So Joey, we have to add that to the list.
Yep.
And
You'll
when we
make
add-
my life, you'll make my life easier to try to illustrate that.
Yeah, because most people don't even know about those. Now we do have the separate installment sale calculator here, where it does allow you. We're almost there with this, Joey. I don't think it would be too hard, so we'll add that to the list. And you are brilliant to think of it. Okay, the next thing I want to show everybody is, and I'm just going to start over again here. Well, when you open it, we can go to the calculators. You see, let me go back to the cover sling here. All right, so you have all these calculators, and the Cupert calculator is now a little different. We did this Thursday and Friday because, quite honestly, Jerry Hesh called me and said, this thing's too complicated. It's hard to figure out. I'm lost. What the heck are you doing? So we now have a new mode for the calculators, and this is a very simple Cupert calculator, and this is how each calculator will start. On the left-hand side, the Qualified Personal Residence Trust is what this is. I've got today's 75/20 rate, 5.4% is the actuarial rate we use. Number of lives, 1 or 2. We could use 2 lives. They're both, how old are these people? 68 and 70. They want to do a 10-year Cupert, and the house is worth $2 million. So across the top, and this is going to be a lighter shade of blue next time you see it, these are my inputs, and these are my outputs. So, and here's an explanation of what each item is. And the most important thing is that this is only $1,110,000 gift. And if they sell the house during the 10-year term, the grantor will receive $119,000 a year for the remainder of the term. And this is what, most of the calculators do. Now, what we can do even in this simple mode is they say, this is great. What would a 12-year Cupert look like? So I click duplicate here, and now I have Cupert number 2 across there, and I click to 12, and now you see Cupert number 2 is 12 years, and the gift is a little bit less, and the annuity is a little bit more. And then and I want to remember, this is the difference between 1 and 2 is here. So I click there, and those 2 become yellow. Then they say, well, let's see a third one on 1 life only. So I'll click duplicate. I'll go to 1 life, and I'll stick with 12 years, and that is Cupert number 3. So it's a little bit different. The difference is right there, so I'll click twice there, and this is telling me that the difference between 1, 2, and 3 are these numbers, and here are the differences. So that is the new simple version, but now what I can do is get out of simple and go to basic. So when I click here to get out of simple, it keeps in blue my original inputs. So this is where you were in blue, and my original results are here in green. So in fact, I'll just show you again. I'll click here. This is where we were. Blue is my inputs, greens are my outputs. Click here again. Now it's more complicated. Jerry's getting confused, but he can see, what is this? Well, here's their joint life expectancy, 20.7 years according to IRS tables. Here's the life expectancy of one person, 16.8 years. I'm showing them dying in 17 years for my illustration purposes. I'm showing the illustration a full 30 years. I'm showing 100% ownership, no discount. And I'm also going to now give you the remainder factor, the probability of surviving. They have a 93% probability of surviving 10 years and 89% probability of the most surviving 12 years. One of them has a 70% probability of surviving those number of years, and the percentage that's a gift. Now, you may say, wait, I don't want all those columns. I'd only like some of them. So I click on Alter Summary of Columns, and now I can select more columns. If you want to see projected value, if you want to see the cash from the rent that they'll be receiving, if they move, if they after the term, if they stay in the house, if you want to see the total removed from the estate and the total subject to estate tax, click Close. Now I have more of these. So below, I have a spreadsheet for each of these scenarios. So I'm going to go to Cupert number 1 spreadsheet. And you notice I'm kind of short on space here below. So I can click on this little eyeball. And when I click on this eyeball, the top display disappears. So I have more room for my spreadsheet. And my yellow across the line shows me when the Cupert term ends, and my purple across the line shows me when the death occurs. And below that still shows me what happens if I'm looking at a 30-year scenario. And you see the estate tax savings each year. I've got to wait till after the term or there's no estate tax savings. And I can click on Alter the detail columns below. And again, I don't need all of these columns. I can have more columns or less columns. I can even put in notes to explain something or another. And then you say, well, this is way too much spreadsheet still. Well, I'll just show you every other year plus the year of death. Click there, and now I'm showing you almost every other year. Now you say, well, this is nice. I sure wish I could put this into an Excel spreadsheet. So I click Export to Excel. And now the spreadsheet just went up here. If you have Google Chrome, it went here. I can open it. And now this opened here, and I have an amendable spreadsheet. So now I go to Joey. Have I missed anything?
No, that was a good coverage.
Okay, so now there's a couple of other things I can do. If you look here at the bottom left, I could do 2 Cuperts and take a discount on each one, and I can set my annual rent. I go to Advanced, I click on Advanced, those 2 items open, and then I could go ahead and do Cupert number 4, and Cupert number 4 could be half of a house worth $850 because of a 15% discount, with rent payable at 7% of the value of the house each year. That's now Cupert number 4 that you see. I can put this back up here so you can see Cupert number 4. The next thing I can do is I can go to Generate Explanation. When I go to Generate Explanation, I could ask for 4 explanations, 1 for each one. I can ask for a planner's checklist, and what's great, the best is I can ask for a PowerPoint presentation on each Cupert. I can put the client's name in. I can hit Submit, and now it's just prepared 4 PowerPoints, 1 for each one. The PowerPoints still need to be refined a little bit, but they are working fine. I can enable editing, and then I've got a PowerPoint, tells me all the inputs of that particular Cupert, shows the client step by step what's going to happen with that particular Cupert, explains the estate tax savings, explains the rent, shows them the PowerPoint that I was displaying, and then explains that they could have done 2 Cuperts if they had wanted to. So that's all being refined. Where did I just close the software? There it is. Okay. By the way, if I accidentally closed the software, when I go back to the software, it opens back up and it's remembered this. But now I want to change, I want to do another client's, but I want to remember, I want to go back to these settings. So I go to File, Save As, click Jones, or whatever I'm going to call it, click Save, and now the data has been saved. So I can come back to it. It's somewhere in our computer where Joey knows where it is. I don't, but it does work. The humor section will be AI generated humorous poetry about Cupids right now, I believe. Let me see. Oh, actually, it's a Marx Brothers movie right now. All right, let me go back to it. It accidentally closed itself. So I reopen. And as I said, it keeps all the data. So that is the Cupid. Any questions, comments, or suggestions for that, guys? Okay. So I'm going to show you one more thing. Well, I got a couple of new things for you guys who are new. We now have a life expectancy calculator. Now, this is off the standard IRS life expectancy tables, which people who smoke are on these tables and people who are not healthy. Our clients are going to live longer on average, but at least this can show me that for a 70-year-old married to 66-year-old, the probability of each of them living is here for how long, and the probability of both of them dying each year is here, and across the top we've got a summary. So that's kind of convenient. We don't have any charts on that yet, but we will. The next calculator we've added is the life estate calculator. So now this tells me, this is Jonathan Blotmacher's, one of his favorite things to do. Oops, I went to the wrong one. The life estate calculator, or maybe that is where I am. Okay, so I've got grandpa is 71 and wants to, let me see where that went. Yeah, he's 71, he wants to buy a $1 million house. Well, he'll pay $485,830. His son will pay $514,170. Grandpa buys the life estate in the house. The son buys the remainder interest. Grandpa moves in. When grandpa is not made a gift. When grandpa dies, the house is completely out of his estate. So we've got the calculator working. We still need to, fancy it up, which we will. And then finally, this is going to change a lot, but I want to show it to you anyway because it fits in with what we've been talking about. And quite honestly, this is based on a spreadsheet that Marcia and I had built for us in 1999 when we were working with a fee-based financial planner. And what this spreadsheet does, for example, is it is telling me that a 40-year-old, let me open all the columns here. This is a 40-year-old with a 38-year-old spouse, life expectancy 40.4 years. They want to retire at age 60. They're going to die at 85. The home's worth $1.5 million. Investments are worth $3 million. Annual rate of return until retirement, 4.75% net of taxes and investment costs. After retirement, 4%. By the way, the home is growing at a lower rate of return. The home is growing right now at 2.5%. I could make that 3% if you like. Then they would like to retire on $175,000 a year in today's dollars. They'd like to leave their children $5 million in today's dollars. They expect inflation at 3.75%. They're going to retire in 20 years. So we think they'll need $13,816,000 to retire. So right now they're at 9 million. So they're short 4,750,000. Right now they're only saving 30,000 a year. They need to save $126,000 a year to make their goal, or they need to receive $1,878,000 from their rich uncle today in order to make their goal based on the savings rate. Now, some of the inputs you have here, and we're going to be adding to these. And by the way, I am not a financial planner. I am not qualified to even show you how to use this module, but honestly, I did want something so that I can get my clients to understand that their life is a spreadsheet. And if they decide, for example, that they need for some unknown reason to have a $3 million house, I can move that. Oops, let me go back. Let me go back here. This is number one. I'm going to go to number two. Saving plan number two, they have to have a $3 million house because that's what their neighbors have. It's only going to grow at 2%, and it's going to cause them to have.
That's not true, Alan. It's going to grow at 12% every year. It always does, right?
Right. But they're going to have to take on $1.5 million debt. So their debt's going to go to $1.75 million. I'll turn up the debt there. Isn't that nice? 6% interest, 15-year mortgage. And what has that done to them? Well, we'll see. Now they need to save $154,000 a year for life, or they're putting themselves back way back. So then I can say, well, how much will this cause you to work? How many more years are you going to have to work? So I'll go to duplicate that, and now I'll just click on the retirement age. Click on the retirement age until I see when they can retire. Is it age 65? Is it age, what does it need to be? Well, he's moved his retirement age to age 69. So how good does that house look? It's going to take 9 extra years of work in order to pay for that house. So the other inputs, just so you know, is I've got, oh, you're going to inherit 500,000. That's nice. What if you don't inherit 500,000? What if grandma blows it? So I'll go to number 4, and here I will take out.
Can't we make 12% on our investments, Alan?
What's that?
What you need to do? I said, can't we just make 12% on our investments and then it'll all correct itself?
Yeah, you're right. I can go to duplicate that one, and I can move this to a 12. I can say, what do my investments need to grow by? That's right. I can just click up here until it matches up. Just the other inputs are reoccurring one-time additions, like an inheritance, or I'm going to get Social Security when I'm 65. How much do I think it's going to be? Again, debt, and then one-time expenses. How about that college? How about a wedding? So I could put in, I'm going to spend $250,000 in year 11 and deal with a wedding of a child. Tell her to elope. It'll save a lot of money.
With a prenup. With a prenup.
Yep. And maybe in year 10, I would like to start donating $100,000 a year to my church or synagogue. So this is going to continue to be refined, but hopefully, somebody who even knows as little as me could start the conversation with a client and then get them to somebody like Chris, who actually knows what he's talking about. But what's going to be nice about this is you'll be able to send it to the client. And the way that's going to work is just so I can show you, I forgot to show you this. When you go to the main module, you click share with client. It gives you a code number and you can change the code. 131415, generate URL, copy to clipboard. And now I can open an email and click that into the browser and email that to the client, and they have 14 days to use it. And most of it will be changeable. It'll be stuck on their names, their ages, and they have to go within 70% on the value of their home and the value of their investments, but they can change anything else. And we're finding that sophisticated clients like to go ahead and play with these things.
I love that spreadsheet.
Oh, thank you. You like that spreadsheet?
Right. To me, it just helps clients make decisions, right? Sometimes you get too many charts and graphs and scenarios, and clients can't make a decision. This just keeps it fairly straightforward by saying, look, the retirement surplus deficit, this is everything you said were your priorities. If you want to execute, you're either above or below. Right.
Right. This is your life. And if you continue to go to the Hard Rock Casino and lose $150,000 a year, there's the column for it.
There's the column.
And that's what your Saks Fifth Avenue shopping habit is doing for you.
Right.
And if you both work, I know you don't want to work, but if you both work, then you'll reach retirement 6 years earlier.
Right.
So, all right, Joey, any final comments?
I think that was great. I think the little camera icon there is good to mention, that you can take a screenshot
Oh,
of
yeah.
either of the tables.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. So it's very helpful here, because although you can't see the whole input, when I click on the camera there, it takes a picture of the whole input. So, oops, not a very good one though. Something's wrong with it. Kevin has to fix that. Or if I take the picture there, it takes the picture of the summary page. So that is, yeah. Thanks for pointing that out. All right, we'll continue to make this as good as we can. It'll be out by January, but please use it as much as you can before then. And if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions on it, please let us know. Chris, thank you so much for a great presentation. I learned a lot, and
Thank you for the invite, Alan.
Yeah. Thanks to, let me just close the sharing there. Yeah. Thank you to all the attendees. Thanks to Sid Kess again for decades and decades of dedication to educating professionals. We sincerely hope that you'll use some of what you learned today to help others, to mentor others, and to, of course, help yourself. Have a fantastic weekend. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.